Recently, there has been various discussions in the Siege community about Valkyrie, one of the oldest and most beloved defenders in the game. One of the main inspirations for creating this video was the recent poll created on Twitter by esports commentator Intero, who posed the question, should Valkyrie's black eye cams work when thrown outside the building? The poll was strongly in favor of allowing the cameras to work outside, but the responses made me take a step back and think, is Valkyrie a little too good? In the replies, some have claimed that her portable black eye cameras are too powerful and frustrating for attackers to find and destroy, with others quick to point out that her gadget takes skill and creativity to master. So how do we find a balance between these ideals? Does anything actually need to change? Let's talk about it. Before we discuss the potential future for Valkyrie, it is important that we perform a stocktake to assess her current strengths and weaknesses and her relevance in the current meta, before posing the question of whether or not she actually needs an adjustment. Now let me preface the following graphics by saying that raw numbers never paint the entire picture when balancing operators, and that numbers should never be the only source used by the balancing cell when making changes. There are a variety of different metrics that can and are used when balancing operators. That said, the win delta versus presence and ban rate statistics can be used to make some assumptions about Valk's current status in the game. As you can see on the following graphic, Valkyrie currently has a 45% presence in platinum and above matches. Additionally, her win delta percent is about 1.4 to 1.5% positive, categorizing her as an overpicked, too strong operator. Again, this stat should not be the sole motivator for change, and it is naive to picture a meta where all operators are picked equally with the same win delta. However, Valkyrie is currently in the top 5 most played operators and the most successful of the 5, suggesting that she is an extremely reliable and powerful pick in high-ranked gameplay across multiple maps and bomb sites. The next graphic displays the top 10 defensive operator bans, with Valkyrie currently sitting at 3rd position. I believe that there are a few major factors driving this high ban percentage. Speaking from personal experience, our rank stacks will ban Valk depending on 2 major factors. Firstly, the map. Some maps such as Border, Coastline, Oregon, and Skyscraper, among others, have expansive areas outside of the map, with many places to hide or in some cases cheese cameras on dark objects, trees, bushes, etc., which can only reliably be found using IQ. Secondly, IQ herself. I will discuss this in more depth later, but currently the only reliable counter to Valkyrie, and most reliable at that, is IQ. If nobody on the team feels comfortable or confident on IQ, or does not want to deal with the frustrating task of finding the cameras for long periods at the start of each round, it's just easier to ban Valkyrie, freeing up the flex to another operator. As we stand in 2021, I believe the stats and anecdotal evidence suggest that Valkyrie is a powerful, versatile, and often frustrating defensive operator for the attack to counter, and contrary to popular belief, she is not as balanced or fun to play against as she could be. But why is this the case? The major issue in countering Valkyrie, I believe, is the visibility of her black eye cameras, particularly outside. As it stands, Valkyrie only has a single reliable counter to her black eye cameras, IQ. From a design standpoint, this made sense at the point of release when the operator pool was vastly smaller to what it is today, but the pool has increased dramatically, and the attack's opportunity to be versatile has barely improved. Currently, IQ has a 20-meter range on her electronics detector, allowing her to spot various defender gadgets. She's currently the only operator that can scan cameras independently without support, placing her as without a doubt the best operator to find and destroy black eye cameras. Other highly situational or inefficient counters are also present. The most consistent of these is Dockerby, who can hack a defender's observation tools so that the attack can physically see the location of black eye cameras. The risk and reliability of this approach often means that in almost every instance, IQ is simply better. With a stronger loadout and faster speed, IQ is a much more comfortable pick when Valk is not banned. Others include Thatcher EMPs, which would be wasteful and inefficient outside of the building, and spamming yellow pings, which is not really the fundamental purpose of that mechanic and is also unreliable. Moving on to a more contentious design choice is the ability for Valkyrie to freely gather information outside of the building, a contradiction to most other forms of intel gathering on the defense. As it stands, the defense can gain permanent intelligence outside in 4 main ways. Default cameras, which are taken out quickly and consistently, Maestro Evil Eyes and Bulletproof Cams, which will be given away by a detected outside alert and cannot be placed far outside the building, and of course, Black Eyes, which are often thrown outside without a prompt to the attack and are a burden to find on various maps. Other gadgets which could gain similar levels of intel outside have been designed to prevent that from happening, such as Echo's yokai camera and drones caught with Mozzie's pests, which lose signal if they leave the defensive border for longer than 3 seconds. From my perspective, this is a contradiction in gadget design philosophy, and in an ideal but maybe sterile game environment, either all defensive gadgets outside of default cams should operate outside, or none of them. To recap some of the recurring points in this video, some common arguments for not allowing black eye cams to operate outside include an assortment of cheesy or cheeky spots to toss the cams, with some maps being notoriously hard to find outside cams, IQ being a soft requirement to counter Valk, and adding to this list the frustration of spawn peaks and runouts, which can be felt by both the attack and the defense. I think we can all agree that executing and countering spawn peaks and runouts is a skill, but on the flip side, Siege is much more enjoyable with 10 players alive inside the map. This frustration is felt by the attack, who after losing a single hard breach or Thatcher will significantly reduce their chances of winning the round. It also extends to the defense, where the teammates of a Valk wasting her cameras and or life in the pursuit of spawn kills and runouts unsuccessfully can become frustrated. A common argument for allowing black eyes to operate outside is that by removing this feature, a large portion of the gadget's creativity and skill execution would be taken away, and for the most part, I agree with this. I thoroughly enjoy getting creative with Valk when I play her, and love consuming content from creators such as Coconut Bra, who have grown their brand around tricks and tips with Valkyrie and other fun to play operators. Therefore, I think we need to revisit the drawing board. What changes can be made to Valkyrie and or to existing attacking operators so that her gadget retains its versatility and creativity without leading to a must-pick attacker and high levels of frustration when trying to locate intelligence, particularly of that placed outside of the building? A tough question which has not really been addressed since her release. Compared to other operators of similar tenure in the game, Valkyrie has undergone quite a small number of balancing changes outside of her loadout stats, most of which have revolved around balancing the loadout as opposed to the utility. The last major change to her utility was impact grenades replacing her deployable shield in Operation Neon Dawn. Various changes have also been made to fine-tune the distance in which her gyro cameras can be thrown, but the distance itself is still powerful enough on most maps to gain intel outside without being excessive. The last major change to directly balance her gadget was over 1600 days ago, one season after the release of Dustline, when her quantity of cameras was reduced from 4 to 3, a testament to the strength of her intel gathering ability. As her history suggests, very few of her fundamental issues, as I highlighted earlier, have been seriously addressed or targeted. So where to from here? Recently in the community, discussion and debate has seemingly revolved around one balancing point in particular, the ability for her cameras to work outside. The poll with the largest sample size that I've managed to find that directly addresses this, as mentioned earlier, was created by Intero not too long ago. He posed the question, should Valkyrie's black eye cams work when thrown outside the building? The poll received over 23,000 responses, and the result was heavily in favor of yes. When attempting to interpret this data, it's important to remember that Parker's audience consists of a strong esports presence, which will often advocate for a top-down balance approach where changes are made to balance pro play with the hope that these changes will filter down to ranked and casual for a more balanced overall experience. With this in mind, I would have expected the poll to actually be a little bit more balanced, if not in favor of no, but clearly the results would suggest otherwise. In order to understand community sentiment a little bit more, I decided to also create a poll on my TikTok account, which tallied a total of over 2,000 votes. Keeping in mind that my community in general is a younger, slightly more casual leaning player base. Ultimately, my poll was unsurprisingly even more in favor of allowing her cameras to work outside. Many people in the comments shared the sentiment that her cameras were easy to find, IQ should be buffed to be even more viable, and that by removing this ability it would ruin the purpose of Valkyrie completely. So it would appear that the community sentiment is against fundamentally changing the way black eye cameras interact with the outside environment. But I still think it's fun to theorycraft some ways, both major and minor, that Valk could be adjusted to make her gadget less frustrating for the attack to find and destroy outside of simply reducing the number of cameras she has access to. One potential change is that her cameras lose signal after being outside of the building for 5 to 10 seconds. This would make their interaction more consistent with Mozzie drones and yokai drones, and could still allow for high-risk plays to be facilitated with teamwork and coordination, instead of Valk being a jack-of-all-trades that can gather her own intel for risky plays. I still believe that this change does not address one point of frustration, which would be teammates throwing away their life cheaply, on bad runouts. Another change I have seen proposed is a range limit so that cameras can only be thrown a particular distance outside of the building. I believe that incorporating this into the game in a way that is intuitive and easy to understand would be quite difficult, and unless the range was extremely small, would hardly mitigate some of the issues currently present. A smaller adjustment that could be made to her gadget is only allowing the cameras to be rotated by Valk herself and disabling the ability when she dies, mirroring the interaction seen between Maestro and his evil eyes. Whilst I think that this change could reduce the frustration factor in some scenarios for the attack, with the camera's high FOV, this would likely have a very little impact. A final tweak that could be made is making the camera emit a much brighter blue ring of light to help attackers locate her cameras. Even with bloom on, this glow can often be near impossible to find, especially outside. A visual change to increase visibility, however, would likely have the knock-on effect of rendering IQ as extremely niche or even useless in most cases. While some of these changes, once fleshed out, could maybe have a positive impact, I still think I have failed to address the key issue here, a lack of varied, reliable, and fun-to-play counters. So let's brainstorm some. Dockerby. She is a niche pick that specializes in crowd control and information gathering. As mentioned earlier, her ability to hack a dead defender's observation tool can be a powerful means to locate and destroy black eye cameras, but I would argue that this method is quite inconsistent, risky, and often not very reliable against competent defensive teams that don't overextend on roams and are quick to trade picks. One way that her ability to find cameras could be enhanced, particularly those outside, could be cameras flashing a bright blue light or emitting a distinct sound when she uses her call ability. This could be tuned to ensure that only cameras within a short to medium range are affected as opposed to globally across the map, forcing a conscious decision between crowd control and intel gathering denial, not both at once. Another niche operator that could fulfill a similar role is Nook. At the time of brainstorming these ideas, Nook's buffs were yet to be announced, but I still thought it would be fun to flesh this concept out a little bit. In addition to avoiding detection from observation tools, the Hell Presence reduction could also send out a short-range pulse every 3 to 5 seconds. The ability is active, that can spot electronics in a similar fashion to IQ's gadget. Now, this ability could be very susceptible to power creep if the range is too far or the duration between pulses too short. In combination with the Crimson Heist buffs, this would likely render IQ obsolete and not be a healthy change to the game. Additionally, Twitch could be enhanced to counter Valk cams more efficiently. Despite being in quite a strong spot in the current meta, I believe that a small change to her shock drones could help in clearing difficult to find cams. A filter on her drone that makes all gadgets easier to see, think the black and white filter on Maestro cams, may help significantly reduce player frustration. That said, this would only reliably alleviate the frustration inside the building, as driving a drone outside is counterintuitive and does not lead to fun or interesting counterplay. Slated to be added to the live build later in the year is the ability for attackers to change their lineup during the preparation phase. The logic being that attackers should be able to gain intel in sight and pick a lineup better suited to the objective and the lineup presented against them. This addition may relieve the issue of IQ being a must pick if Valkyrie is not banned, as attackers will be able to select IQ on a more situational basis. And whilst this sounds good in theory and some may argue completely negates any of the issues I have talked about earlier, it really just transfers the frustration to another phase of the round. It's important to remember that there is no guarantee that the attack will spot Valkyrie in the prep phase, meaning that IQ is still a blind blanket pick, or in order to gain the intel, the attack may be forced to sacrifice multiple drones, screwing them later in the action phase. Don't get me wrong, this change, if it reaches the live build, will help to alleviate some of the issues I've talked about, but it's only a band-aid. To wrap things up, Valkyrie is a fantastic operator in her current state. Her gadget has flown under the radar for a while despite some glaring frustrations that face the attack. Heading into the future, I would love for a balance to be struck with her gadget, which allows for the attack to more reliably find cameras in more varied manners without sacrificing the creativity and skill that separates good and great Valkyrie players. Maybe centering the discussion around her cameras operating outside is too narrow. Instead, let's broaden the discussion and find a sweet spot for both sides.